It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
All right, man. Hey, man, good to have you on the program tonight. We're going to be talking about the illusion of us, the suppression and evolution of human consciousness. Matt, before we get going, tell our audience a little bit about you. How'd you get started in writing a book like that, and what's it all about?
All right, well, thanks. I was someone who started writing in college because I started to uncover some certain things about history and things about the truth that that didn't really jive with what we're being told in the mainstream, and a lot of things that were kind of being given in our curriculum in schools and various things like that. And so I had no intention of being a writer who was trying to uncover, some people would call them conspiracies or ancient history or the truth. It kind of just happened where I kind of stumbled upon it. And I started writing because I had some kind of really interesting experiences in college with, extreme hiking adventures and animals that were trying to charge down on me. Various kind of interesting encounters that occurred that caused me to write. And then subsequently, I then started researching and finding out truth, and that led me to then write about the whole nother side of it. I was writing like articles about hiking in nature, and then I moved into all of a sudden writing about consciousness and quantum mechanics and just all these things that are so far out there that most people don't really understand. And it kind of took me down that rabbit hole of really delving into the mysteries of who we really are and what our history has really been.
Well, I tell you what, I think most people should recognize now that we have been lied to, and that many of the things that we even think have really sort of been programmed into us. I say there's a cabal of dried up old crackers of a European descent, most probably, but you could also label them Illuminati or something else. But there does seem to be a sort of a programming to the general populace, and I hate to be part of that mass populace that is just going along and doing. I like to buck the system. If I see your sacred cow, I'm going to kick its gonads right up its rear. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to take it. But how did you? What was the first thing, Matt, that you started to see? Wait a minute, man. This doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right. What was it? A topic? A subject? What was it?
Okay, so the title of the book is The Illusion of Us, the Suppression and Evolution of Human Consciousness. Because when I started researching consciousness and what it really was, and kind of these things that I wasn't really reading about in other places, the more I looked, with things like medicine, with things like what our curriculum is, what the media is showing, all of these things, I started to realize that there was a massive suppression of not only the truth of history, but more importantly, the truth of what consciousness really is and who we really are. And it's a very powerful experience for me, because as silly as that sounds to a lot of people, and a lot of people would just kind of laugh when you start talking about some kind of a conspiracy of the truth and a holding back of the truth. But when you start to look at the evidence of what's actually out there and what the truth really is, you see that at every level it seems like it's been held back, because of the fact that what I discovered was, through so many other brave researchers as well, is the truth has become so big, so many lies kind of piled on top of each other. It's like when someone in their life, and they're kind of a liar in their life, and they just keep lying everywhere they go, and eventually catches up with them, right? It becomes bigger and bigger, and they can't really manage it. That's kind of what's happened with the truth of history. It's become so big and so different than what we're being told that it hasn't been revealed to us, because it would disrupt society so much. It would disrupt a lot of things.
Well, Matt, isn't the excuse they use sort of for disclosure of the existence of aliens? They say that if the population had that information, it would break down, and particularly the religious institutions, which now most people don't have any use for. A lot of say the alternative media doesn't have use for, say, organized religions. But the fact of the matter is, organized religions in and of itself there is sort of a glue there for society, like it or not. And whatever the teaching is, there is some sort of glue. The people in general, they seem like, they go to church, they pay their taxes, they obey the rules. They're way more rule obedient than, say, alternative media people that say they look for rules to break, and I would count myself among them. But once that core is dissipated or undone in its mooring, then
right.
wouldn't that be the start of chaos on a larger scale?
Well, that's part of the control system, I like to call it, coming down. We've had, and again, a lot of people would kind of roll their eyes when you start mentioning this, but really, when you start looking at what we're going to kind of go over tonight, you can't help but not want to look into yourself. And I really encourage anybody. We've been lied to by so many so-called experts for so long that anytime someone tells you something, including me or including Daniel, you should be looking it up yourself to verify it, because the truth has kind of become so murky and so foggy. And like you said, religion is one of these aspects where long ago, and as you can look in the evidence, it used to be based on very good intentions and kind of the freedom of the spirit and understanding where we are in the universe. And it became hijacked and turned into a control system. And so you mentioned how we're seeing less and less people that are quite as religious as they used to be, and how that's kind of leading to a lot more people starting to question the truth. And that's right. That's a really good point. Is that the disclosure of the truth is happening in a way where it's slowly occurring every single year, a little bit faster than it was before. We're seeing this acceleration of it, and religion is seeing more and more people flock away from it and moving towards kind of not being an atheist, but being someone who's just spiritual or whatever it is. And that's worrying a lot of them. And like you said, if the truth of disclosure, and you just mentioned extraterrestrials, well, the reason why extraterrestrials aren't told to us is because it's part of this giant lie. It's all connected, where if one of the elements came out like that, it would kind of cause a domino effect of all the rest of them to follow. So they have to hold the whole thing back, because that's the only way they would be able to maintain the status quo of what we have. And what do we have? Well, we have a world where people we're this incredibly intelligent being who is spending the majority of our life working the entire time. Nobody ever has any time to ever have to go look into truth themselves. Nobody has any time to, and that's the idea, is time is basically gone. Time has been stolen from everybody, to the fact where most people would never even begin to have enough time to look into the truth of what we're saying, because their life is just so jam-packed with so many things that are causing them to either have to work more because they have to pay off certain items or whatever it is. And so the truth has been very cleverly hidden among generations of people who no longer look for it. They live in a world of ignorance, where they simply get their truth from K through high school, sometimes college, and then they go and they watch the media, and they think that they have the gist of how everything in reality works. They think they understand the vastness of the cosmos around us, and that's a very good way that we've been controlled. If you think to yourself, well, how do you get someone to see the truth? You have to go through certain very specific steps for them to do it. It's part of kind of awakening someone's awareness potential. And the way to do that is kind of start right now where we are on this planet. In most of our TV shows and most of our media, reality shows and those things that are portraying kind of the glorification of us spending lots of money and going to tons of parties and all these things that are almost like a fake illusion of reality. That's why I call the book The Illusion of Us, because we've been kind of programmed to this with all these various different things to kind of no longer realize, even with all the technology and all these advancements we have possible with, telescopes that can view, hundreds of light years into the distant cosmos, we've all kind of decided to ignore that. We've all decided to kind of forget that exists. Someone watches something on Discovery Channel, and that was cool, that was fun. But then they don't think about it ever again, and they go back to what they were doing before, which is like, I'm going to go from point A to point B, and I'm never even going to look out at the night sky. I'm never going to look at the stars anymore. I'm never even going to go outside and do anything except just go from one building to another. And that's such a strange idea for a species.
we're talking about the illusion, or maybe somebody could say the matrix. We all are sort of in a matrix. Why do we believe what we believe? And what is that program mechanism that is used against us? Because if we understand the programming language that they have, then maybe we will be able to break ourselves free and live in the world that we choose, a construct of our design. Right. What is the illusion of us? Are we trapped consciousness or living on a holodeck?
So reality is real. The world is not a flat plane, and it's not all being projected, and all the stars aren't fake. It is real, but it's only real to the perception that we have available to us. So we're not able to perceive beyond, essentially, most people aren't able to really proceed beyond this third dimensional plane that we've been kind of trapped in. It's actually called Ka by the Egyptians, and it's the third dimensional plane that we think is the great feat of this reality to conquer. Climbing the highest peak or whatever it is. When in reality, even our consciousness itself doesn't even reside in the third dimension. So really, the great adventure of this reality is within, and trying to go within and figure out consciousness. Because when you do, you go far beyond the third dimension. You actually become free. Because we have to understand is that the third dimension of thinking that consciousness isn't real, and it's just a smart brain, right? Just a smart brain thinking here in this third dimensional reality. That's how we're kept in a box. If that thinking is why people are so violent all over the world to each other, because they've no concept of realizing that we're really not. We're not all just like pitted against one another. This is a planet that's being surrounded by billions of other galaxies and other planets that harbor life, and yet we're kind of worrying about little bits of soil here and there. It's kind of funny if you really zoom out and think about it with that perspective.
Matt, if you were to describe in our conversation, what are we talking about?
What do you mean? What are we talking about?
What are we discussing right now?
We're discussing the idea that truth hasn't been really given to us in the way we've been told, and not only that, but our perceptions of what we think reality should be has actually been kind of manufactured for us.
Of the ancient gods, how many of those are still alive?
Well, that's one of the things that we kind of misperceptions, and one of the reasons why they're called gods is that they can essentially live for thousands of years, if not sometimes longer. And we see in some of these ancient cuneiform writings some of the dates on some of these beings that have existed, like Atrahasis, who is known as Noah, and some of these beings who have lived 500 to 900 years, because there was a completely different type of human that used to exist back then, and we've been genetically downgraded so that our cells will break down at a maximum of 120 years. But these beings didn't have that, and that's why they could these great pharaohs and these various different beings drinking monatomic gold and all these things, they could live for hundreds of years and they would outlive everyone around them, and that's why they were considered gods. And yes, some of them are still here.
Which one of those gods alive today that can come in our plane of in our dimension, touch our lives, and basically recreate a new life in us so that our eyes are open and we see the truth? Which one of those gods is doing that currently?
I would say that all throughout history there's been this one very, very compassionate God who has who has kind of designated himself with the total enlightenment of humanity, and that God has gone through many names, and those names are Thoth, Hermes, Ningshita, Enoch. When you start looking at who that was in all of these different writings across the world, you see extremely similar characteristics to all of them. Very so similar, in fact, and information that carries over, that you start to realize that it's just an incarnation of the same being, same God.
Have you been touched by said God?
It seems like when you're uncovering the truth and you really start kind of going down that road where it's not just a casual thing, but you say, aha, you put this piece together and then you put this piece together. When you're doing that, you feel this tremendous energy. You really feel completely different, like you've never felt before. And I do believe that right now humanity is being used as kind of chess match pawns for the gods to kind of go different directions. And when certain humans decide they want to follow what I like to call the hero's path, which is not dedicating their whole life, but at least dedicating some time in their life to uncovering the truth and then maybe becoming a teacher to try to spread it, they get assistance and kind of by these gods of history that have always been there.
All right. Mandy Thompson has this question for you, and I'm going to relate to it here in just a second. She says, are giants on our plane, and will we be able to see them?
When I was researching truth, giants were one of the hardest things for me to accept because it just sounds silly. But the more I started looking into these stories of all these things that we consider myth now, the more I see that some of them actually were real. And some of them are symbolic metaphors, and then other things are actually really trying to say that. And so one of the best nuggets of truth that I've come across in researching is one of the most famous people we get taught about in school, Magellan, right? Magellan circumnavigated the world because Spain wanted to find a route to go all across the world because they were dominating the eagle through Spain was dominating all over the world. And so they sent Magellan to find this route to travel around the world. And of course, we have the problem of the Americas with the Panama Canals. They can't go across it.
I don't know how much research you've done in the conventional Bible, but it did say at some point that in the days of Noah, there were giants in the land. I think if you jump to the New Testament in there, it says, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man comes. And of course, that basically is saying that there's going to be giants reappear. Now, Steve Quayle is a big one on giants. There are people, and they say, I've had on a couple of people on this program that say that there's been some sort of skeletons or something been found in Antarctica, indicating that there are in fact giants.
Okay, so what happened is, long in our history, the reason why the pharaohs of Egypt and all of these very, very tall beings with elongated skulls have been mimicked and worshipped is that they were these lost giants, which simply meant they had this genetic DNA from the gods. Now, to get back to what we were saying, because it directly leads into it, is Magellan was searching for a route to circumnavigate the world. And this is something that people don't know because it's been very much kept out of the history books. But I encourage everybody to go look at this. And he had a scribe with him who was recording all the different things he was seeing on his journey. And we don't often believe truth unless it comes from someone who's actually respected. And that's why I'm telling you this. Mm-hmm. So Magellan is traveling around the world, and he's sailing south of Patagonia. And he lands to go in and get food and supplies. And they run across these massive giants. This is Magellan. And the scribe that's with him starts recording all of these accounts of these beings that were 10 feet tall or more. And, you know, some of them were violent, and some of them they would fight with, and they ended up having to leave, and they sailed back to Spain, and they gave all these accounts of these giants. And the Queen of Spain actually sent subsequent trips back to this area and actually recovered some of these massive skeletons of these giants.
Right. And it has been said that the Smithsonian Institute in early in American history was seizing the skeletons that they found in these earthen mounds right here in Indiana. There's something called the Anderson Mounds, and they just claim that Indians just for no reason just piled dirt up and whatever. But I totally don't believe that. But I'm thinking. There is something to this giants thing. Perhaps some have claimed that the Anunnaki are going to come down. They're going to be giants. I'll tell you what, Matt, if you had one of them big, long, elongated skulls, would you have elongated skull if you had if they said if you had your skull elongated, you could have supernatural powers? Would you agree to that?
I think the reason they were doing it was to try to mimic what the gods already had. So it was like they saw the gods with these enlarged craniums, and they're very tall beings, and so these gods, of course, had knowledge that was far beyond what they could ever even imagine, and so they thought, well, and once those gods disappeared, they would mimic them because they thought, like you said, that would make them more intelligent and be just like those gods. Mm-hmm. And so these you mentioned Noah and all these things. What we have to understand is there's this lost history of things that have occurred on this earth. And the reason why so much of it is gone is that there have been cataclysms that have wiped it out. And we're kind of picking up the pieces of, you mentioned the Smithsonian. The truth has been, again, so suppressed that when they were finding skeletons like that, they were actually taking them out. The U.S. Navy was actually taking, especially during World War II, in World War I, they were taking them out in the ocean, actually dumping them out in the Pacific Ocean so sharks could eat them. And so that nobody could ever find the truth. And because if nobody ever saw evidence, then they could keep perpetuating this lie of what we have in school of this curriculum, how we just simply evolved from apes and that's all it is. And hey, guess what? Now you just go about and do your thing and keep fighting each other and don't think about anything that has to do with higher consciousness.
Well, all right, here's one from Dreamwalker. In what dimension does consciousness reside? And I'll tell you what, I want to answer that, but first of all, what is consciousness?
Okay, so one of the things that I really try to hammer in my book, one of the most important things in The Illusion of Us, is us being able to separate the true self of who we are. Who are we? Are we this body that you see in front of you, or are we something different? Are we something that's not contained within? Is it some kind of an antenna that receives our consciousness, right? Because if someone sits around all day and eats a bunch of junk food, they're going to feel so sluggish and slow, and they're almost going to have no connection to their consciousness. It's like their antenna is completely shut off, right? But if someone eats a bunch of vegetables and then runs around outside and starts thinking about expansive things about consciousness, that whole entire transition of how that being is thinking is completely different. They all of a sudden have tuned into their true self. So that's why history has been so easily concealed, is that the most basic stepping block that we have to separate ourselves is that we are our consciousness. That's our spirit. That's who we are. And that this physical body is simply just this temporary mortality experience for us to go through this life here. And so you mentioned consciousness. Well, we are living in the third dimensional plane. But so consciousness exists beyond the third dimension, exists beyond the fourth dimension. That's where consciousness resides, completely outside of Earth. And so if someone is kept in the physical only, then they're never going to strive for anything to even think about the vast existence.
Do only organic beings have a consciousness? Do plants have consciousness?
Yes, they do. That was a very difficult thing for me to fully understand, is what kinds of consciousness exists out there. And they're not, and clearly what I've come to understand is that there are many, many different kinds of consciousness. There are they're not all the same kinds of consciousness. There's like you said, there's a plant consciousness. There's an animal consciousness, and all these kinds of things. They're different kinds of consciousness, and they can't really be measured against each other because that's not really how reality works. They're too different. There is an intelligence with plants. You can see it so clearly.
Okay. For instance, you have sunflowers. It is clear you can literally watch the sunflower turn its seeded head toward the sun. Now, I don't know if that's all organic. I just think the plant likes to bathe in the little nude sunbathe in there. What's going on there? Is it consciousness or is it organic?
Well, you're talking about several things happening at once. I mean, that plant is directly connected into this massive hierarchy system of the plants on the earth. So there's this earth system of nature. All the different plants that are growing out, they all have roots down into the same place. And so that those flowers on that sunny day, when that sun is just cresting over the trees, it's responding to wanting that energy.
It says, Matt, do you have a religion, or you just consider yourself spiritual?
You'll see that in the future we're gonna redefine what we consider when people have religion. I would call myself just a kind of a spiritual person of the universe, where I believe very strongly in kind of developing an awareness of where you belong and where you fit in the whole cosmic aspect of things. And so what would you call that? I guess you would just call it a spiritual universal being.
All right. Hey, so you've got a book, Illusion of Us, The Suppression and Evolution of Human Consciousness. Matt, where can people get that? And do you have a website or anything, or get it from Amazon or what?
Sure. Please go on Amazon and find the latest copy on there. I have a YouTube page, Matthew LaCroix, LaCroix, where I create a lot of movies. I really enjoy creating little mini movies and things like that, where I can explain the truth from another angle and various things. And also I have a Facebook page, The Illusion of Us, where I share a lot of new evidence and various things like that.
Very, very good. All right, man, it was a great, interesting first hour there. We were talking about the illusion that we are sort of living in. And some people might even call that a matrix. And how do you dice out? How would a person dice out the fact that they have been so brainwashed that they can't even make a intelligent decision that's not based on somebody else's dictates?
Well, when I was, again, putting all these pieces together, I realized that it was almost a perfect system. It was so well designed and so clever that it simply wasn't, wasn't like a couple elite men who just wanted power. This was something so well done that that's why this 90% of people everywhere have no idea of any of it, because they go through an entire lifetime of very meticulously from school, which is like almost like boot camp, where think about it in school, right? If someone goes through just up through high school, if they're different at all from the kids around them, if they have a big imagination, they're thinking about the stars and all these things, they're going to be ridiculed in school and cast out, and they're not going to have any friends. They're not going to feel like they have any self-worth. So one of the things I talk about in the suppression chapter is how we have this entire segment of society who has the very ones who are the intelligent outside thinkers who want to bring all this to the table are the very ones who are cast out and thrown into the gutter. And that's why society has just generation after generation kind of evolved to be what it is now, because it's built on so much misinformation and conditioning. It's called social conditioning for thousands of years. That's how far back it's gone, that people have no idea that it's anything different.
How do you find evidence that the truth is true? When you find a truth, what evidence do you measure it against to make sure it is the truth?
You must start by being objective and learning the things that are a certain way, understanding the things around you. And the only way to do that is to simply fill yourself with as much knowledge as possible. And the first thing to do that with, people say, well, how do you fill yourself with knowledge if it's all true knowledge? Fill yourself with knowledge of everything around you. Learn the world, learn mountain ranges, learn countries, learn different groups of people, then learn about the stars and the planets around us. And then that's how you start filling yourself with things and start understanding. But again, you're going to get tripped up, because the further you go, the more you're going to run into areas that have been manipulated. So then at that point, like I said, you have to become like Sherlock Holmes, where you have to follow kind of that intuition inside, where you objectively weigh things and you look at evidence. And really, when people start down that path, they call it the rabbit hole, like in the Matrix. Once you start on truth and you start laying foundations down, you know what's true. It's because it starts to all fall into place, and you see that it's all connected to this great sequence of things that have happened. And that's why you often, like me, you feel anxiety and pressure to want to then tell others, because it's a very big thing to hold.
Hey man, if you were with a friend and you were giving these great deep dissertations, and you're going on for say half an hour, and then you look for a response, and your friend says, okay, hey, you want to go get a Big Mac at McDonald's? Would that depress you?
That happens all the time. That's welcome to my life. You begin to have to only tell certain people who are ready for that kind of information. You run up against so many different people who have a different level of consciousness. That's the first thing we need to separate here. Remember, we talked about how there's different kinds of consciousness out there, like in plants. Well, people have their own level of consciousness as well, and the spectrum is pretty enormous.
It says, do you believe that there's a spaceship under the Sphinx as the emerald tablets of Thoth states?
Thoth. Yeah, so basically, spaceship we shouldn't take that as a literal term. I believe underneath there are halls called the halls of Amenti underneath the Sphinx that also go underneath connect all the way to the Giza pyramids. These great, which by the way, they just found, if you look at some of the news from several months ago, using sonar in various technological tools, they found all these underground cavities. But that's all they told people in the news. They just said we found them, but we haven't heard anything else since, because the halls of Amente, if you look at the emerald tablets, which were found in the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, Mexico, right, all the way across the world, they talk about this time we're entering right now, and they talk about how we're basically children of men who have lost all sight of knowing who we really are, and Thoth is this great being that came before us, who was trying to wake us up to the truth of any of this, and we've kind of forgotten all about it.
We were talking about doing away or hiding the truth. I remember, I believe was it the Library at Alexandria? Was that the one that the Romans burnt those books, took 6 months, and they heated their bathhouses with them? Can you imagine the information that was in those books?
Well, that's the whole point. That the Library of Alexandria represented one of these extremely important libraries, the reason why the Library of Alexandria was targeted, and by the way, it was targeted, was because it contained the knowledge of Atlantis. And today, if we look at famous philosophers that we put on the highest pedestal, even like Plato, who in the Timaeus and Critias talks about where Atlantis was, and he talks about when it was destroyed, we choose to ignore that because it's something that we think is a fairy tale and a myth. Yet one of the greatest philosophers in history talks about that very thing.
A question came in from the live chat. Which civilization do you believe was closest to the truth, and why?
Well, I guess there's been, if you want to go to the one that's been closest, you'd have to go to the oldest one, because over time they all became more and more corrupted. So I'd have to say the Sumerians. The Sumerians contained the most wisdom that was kind of uninterrupted. So if you want to know the truth, it's very easy. You simply just focus on Sumerian cuneiform tablets, because what it means is they're the first advanced culture we have. We can look at their writing system, and we can tell that they're advanced, where they had astronomical skills, they had growing, harvesting based on cycles. All these different things tell us about how advanced these people were. And they were so advanced that the things they wrote about in these cuneiform tablets, and what that means is simply writing that can be put into stone, so it can be around forever, because anything that's written on paper or animal skin degrades and disappears. So the only way to keep it around forever would be to put it in rock. So these cuneiform tablets basically give us a snapshot of what occurred in our past. So all these things I talk about, as crazy as they sound, all you have to do is go look at these writings from these advanced civilizations and see what they were talking about. Okay. See what they were saying about what our real story is, what happened in our past, how we were genetically jump-started, and all.
What do you know about any coming cataclysmic events? There's always people in the audience. We want to know about doomgasms, man.
Okay, so why did this is a very, I got to expand on this one a little bit, guys. I apologize, but this is very important. Why did all of this get lost? What happened? Well, there have been cataclysms in our past that have been responsible for us losing all of this. And then, if you were to have a cataclysm wipe all of this off the planet, wouldn't that be a perfect opportunity for those who are jealous and maybe don't want our expanded consciousness? That would be the perfect time to kind of create a false illusion of reality, wouldn't it? Because there would be no one really left to kind of defend it. So 12,500 years ago, we had the Ice Age here, where ocean levels were 400 feet lower than they are today. And we can find ancient civilizations and cities all across, especially Eastern Asia, off like Japan, where they're underwater by hundreds and hundreds of feet of seawater.
Yeah, I'm actually showing your pictures that you sent me, and one of them is the underwater thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so if you look at those structures, you can see that they're very sharp structures that have had no erosion and no water damage or anything. They're structures that have been man-made, who have been lost to the oceans, because during the Ice Age, when all of that water was locked up in ice, when these cataclysms occurred, which go look at our history with our ice core samples and all of us stuff, you can see that the last Ice Age ended around 12,000 years ago, which is the exact same date that we see mirrored all over the world with the loss of these advanced civilizations. We had catastrophic events occur on Earth that were so dramatic that most human beings on Earth were wiped out. And that's how nobody was left to tell the story. And so, in Turkey, there's an underground city called Derinkuyu. I really encourage people to look this stuff up. And they could fit to this day underground, right? If you were to dig through rock and create an underground city, they can fit to this day more than 20,000 people underground. But what's even more interesting is that at these doorways where they come in, instead of just being like an open door where people could walk in and out, they had these massive round stones that were so big that they would have to roll them over the doorway to protect any kind of an event that occurred. And at the same time, the Hopi Indians all the way across the world, their legend from the highest elders they have are that they were led into these caves 12,000 years ago by these beings to survive. And what you learn, and then you look in the Bible with the story of Noah that we think is all fake, these waters that flooded all of the earth. And it's actually very real, but the Noah story has been turned into a fairy tale joke because of the way that they portrayed it. So imagine a cataclysm occurring on this earth and wiping out everything we remember that occurred in the past. And so all these megalithic structures, like the pyramids of Giza and Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, they can all be dated to this 12,500 time period before these cataclysms wiped them out. So, having said that, that's what occurred in our past.
Okay. Well,
the very same thing that caused those events to occur is passing through right now. And what that is there is a planet that's part of our solar system that has the knowledge has been suppressed. It's been called Planet X. And all these probes have been sent out throughout history. There's even that SpaceX shuttle that was just blown up that we saw, right? That's right, I said blown up. Mm-hmm. But watch the video from that very slowly.
Yeah.
It's called SpaceX because it was literally going to find Planet X. And so there's this planet that exists with this massive elliptical orbit. And that these cuneiform writings we talked about from our earliest civilizations, they talk about how these cataclysms occurred. And Noah's real name, which is the same name as one of these cuneiform tablets, was Atrahasis.
Oh, really?
So one of these cuneiform tablets that I want everyone to look at is called the Epic Atrahasis. And Atrahasis was the real name of Noah. And you learn that he was this being who had been told against the guidance of the gods about this great flood coming. And that was this cataclysm that occurred in our past. Now, right now, we're going through situations where volcanoes are erupting all over the planet. We're seeing all kinds of changes occurring because right now we're entering the same kind of thing that occurred before, but nowhere near as serious. What it represents is Planet X, depending on where it passes between our Earth and the Sun, can have either a catastrophe on our planet or it can have just subtle impacts. And everyone is heading to the hills right now. There's so much fear about Planet X causing all this destruction on the Earth. Mm-hmm. And everything that I can see
Are you running to the hills?
No, because everything that I've been shown is that we've actually been planned to reach this time for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Mayans knew about the calendars. And we're not reaching this time just to be wiped out. That's why they knew that this path now they knew where it would fall and that it wouldn't cause cataclysms. And I think right now you're seeing so much fear mongering behind it because fear has been the ultimate tool to hold back humanity. Fear is the ultimate tool to keep people in their lowest chakra, their red chakra.